Howdy doody YouTubers and iTunes dudes. You are dialed into Frivolous Gravitas, the podcast of 1,000 pods cast and counting. I am your host, Christopher Driver, alongside with me today, my co-producer and co-host, the enchanting Jordan Roy. We have a very special and convoluted subject to wander through today, and if this introduction is any hint as to what we'll be discussing, simplicity vis-a-vis senseless complexity is sort of the name of the game. We see and hear it often in the world today, whether it be in the news or school or at work. People try to find ways of oversimplifying needlessly to the detriment of communication and then over-complexifying simple things ostensibly to exaggerate or emphasize their own intellectual merits. For whatever reason they believe that works, people do it. So today we're going to analyze simplicity itself. We'll try and see when people are misusing it, when people are overdoing it, and why we should do it at all. So with that, I'll let Jordan take the reins and give us some guidance as to where we're going to take the discussion.
Yes, so felicitations. That was indubitably a dubious amount of complexity thrust upon the unwilling and unwanted YouTube audience who no longer ostensibly is being coerced into viewing this more avant-garde resuscitation of our daily mores.
Ouch.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense, did it? No, I was just putting words together, and it worked because I know how English works, so I was just kind of able to do that. Now, what did I say? I didn't really say anything. I was just letting them flow. So this is not a useful sentence. Like, it was funny, but like it's not very useful. And now the reason I'm kind of got a bit of a pet peeve about some of this stuff is because that there's so many of us who think that like that is a valid way of having any kind of discourse. It is frustrating. It's annoying. It's not helpful. Which is probably the most thing. So we're going to be talking today, as Chris said, about all things relating to simplicity, but mostly about how simplicity itself is more of a virtue than I think we give it credit for. So one of the things I learned when I was in school was that it doesn't really help if you sound like that. You'll be reading a bunch of stuff, and you'll have journal articles, and you'll have, the newspaper and all these people using all these words and jargon. You go to a different faculty and you don't understand anything they're saying. Now, the thing is that a lot of those people, if you go in, if you're in biology and you go to engineering, there's a lot of jargon there and it sounds really smart, but those guys have put the work in, and vice versa. If the engineering guys go to the biology side, and they'll be like, oh man, these guys know a lot of different jargon. And if they go over to the sociology side, they'll be like, what are these guys talking about? Both of them, because everyone does have all their own jargon. Now, that is jargon, I think we defined it a couple, maybe 10 episodes ago, where that's something you use to facilitate language. It's not meant to be more complicated. And it is used for... It's meant for use within something. So if I'm working at a paint store, I'm going to use paint store jargon because that it makes the sentence is easier to get across. No, it's not.
And that's because there's technical detail behind the words that you're using that have specific purpose, right?
Right. So when I say something like so I could say sociology or biology or engineering. These do not describe those professions or those fields of study at all. Engineering is a massive field of study where you learn how to put things together, how things work. It's an amazingly creative field too. But at the same time, are you working with computers, or are you, oh, I'm not actually an engineer, I dig up landmines. Oh, wait, but you are an engineer. Yeah, it's my trade is called engineer, but that doesn't mean I'm an engineer. So it does help to understand these things, but like I don't understand like a lot of the biological jargon. But when you move beyond that, if you carry that jargon outside of that, you're going to exist in a world where no one gets you. So all you're going to think is like, you're going to show people that you have like a PhD and who cares, but you're not going to be able to exist very well in the world. So one of the things that I learned when I was in school was simplicity. Keep it simple. One thing my wife says often is that if you like with math or with science or anything like that, she'll say something like, if you can explain it, you don't know it until you explain it to your grandmother. Or you don't know it properly until you can explain it to your grandmother and have her understand it herself. And this is a really good way to go, because, what is this guy saying in this piece? Well, he's saying this. Okay. You can repeat their words and say, okay, textbook definition, this is what they actually said. Okay, but what does that mean? So you kind of suss it out and you move it over in your brain, and then you eventually get it to a point where you can just, oh yeah, I grok this now. And now I can apply it and I can move it around. And we've all really seen this. You've seen people who have there's a couple people on YouTube who take very complicated things and they just have a way of describing it to you that really hits it home. They just know how to do it well. I had an anthropology teacher that just was able to explain all the stuff we were learning, and I really he moved on to another university, and the university was weaker for it because he had an element of simplicity where he was just able to understand, okay, this is what this guy's talking about.
PBS Studios is really good for that. They've got YouTube channels for like crash courses, and Space Time is another great show where they bring cosmology down to the level of high school educated people, which I think is phenomenal. When you can bring a complex subject like astrophysics down to
and you're still gonna have to put some of the work in, because it is actually complicated. Things are actually complicated. And this is kind of what underlies this entire conversation, is that people are complicated. The world is complicated. It's wonderful and wondrous, but like, how does a tree work? Oh boy. But like, so there's no need to needlessly complicate things more than absolutely necessary.
Unless you're describing something that's complex, right?
Right. Well, it's just like, okay, here's where it gets complex. But take something like Shakespeare. And this is, I just taught a module on Shakespeare, so it's fresh in my mind. Sorry. Need some water. One of the things, edit that out maybe. One of the things that I was trying to get across to my student was that, we all approach Shakespeare and we're like, oh, look, I'm reading Shakespeare, and then I am delving into the mysteries of metaphor and simile. Oh God, spare me. But like, it wasn't written like that. It wasn't written for, history majors. It wasn't written for English majors. It wasn't written for, PhD candidates or philosophers or this or that. It was written for everybody. The Globe Theater had, the groundlings were all people who paid a couple, groats to get in. I don't actually know how much it was, but it was a very small amount. You could get in and watch a play, which is essentially a movie back then. So with Shakespeare, and this is a good example of this, through time, we're giving it gravity. It has temporal gravitas, but the reality of it is quite different. You had everyone on every level of society enjoying these shows, but now, because it is worth seeing and it does have that importance to everyone all over the world, everywhere of all time, that's why it's good. And so we say, oh no, this is important, this is special, this should be reserved for only this and that, and then people aren't engaging with it because it's some kind of sacred text now. It's not just a story about a guy whose wife tells him that, hey, we should totally try for being king of Scotland. And then everyone dies. And there's a bunch of witches who literally just invent Halloween. Not literally, but they do them, the bubble, toil and trouble. And this is just rhymes that sound cool. One scene, I think it's scene 2, a guy answers the door and he just tells a bunch of knock jokes, which are politically relevant to that time period, but it's still kind of neat. So and then there's the insults, which are just brilliant. But yeah. So the thing about it is that it sounds, and it does take a bit of effort to get into it. And one of the things I was doing with Shakespeare was, you go through it. Let's see what it says. Let's see how it's arranged. Let's see how it's, what is he actually saying here? And then we went through it and been like, okay, here's what's actually happening. And I tried to make it as we want to appreciate the beauty of the words, but at the same time, just understand the story as it is, instead of being like, what am I missing? What am I not getting? Oh, no. It's like, okay, his wife is just really pissed because she got a letter telling him, and now now Macbeth is deciding that he's not going to go through with it because he's got guilt, and his wife's just like, fine, I'll be the man here. And then storms off and finishes the deed, comes back with blood on her hands, and she's like, look, you weak man, you. And so she insults his manhood, and, moving on with the scene, which is, a couple people being suspicious of Macbeth in the forest. And it's just kind of like, okay, this is a story I get. Once you take away the clouds and you see, okay, this is what the story is, and you can go back and be like, wow, okay, that's a really clever way of saying that. Okay, this is really quite genius. And then you can dive into the complexity once you simplify it, because it was meant to be understood pretty right off the hop. Okay, this guy's doing that guy's doing that. But then when the beauty of it is that when you dig into it, there's more. And then when you dig into it more, there's even more. And that's where we lose it, is that because we're stuck at this, oh, it's so complicated, I don't like it, or this or that. It isn't really that complicated. It's just written in an Old English. So you do have to give it a bit of effort. But at the same time, the story itself is wonderful. The stories themselves are wonderful. But
on that note, I think part of the poetry and the art form is the needlessness of the complexity. And I mean, I'm obviously biased because I wrote a completely gratuitously verbose book that was specifically just to be poetic. And using flowery language like that really helps the author express a type of contrast between emotions, thoughts, and feelings and experiences, not just for the words that you're using, but for the words that you're pairing together. So adding too many words actually helps you understand what's not being written, so to speak. But I think that's really lacking, especially in music today, where lyrics are so simple that there's nothing to hold on to in a song anymore, except for the hook that just repeats over and over and over again because it's catchy. Like, there is no feeling to it, in my opinion. And I understand that's personal preference, but in speaking with Shakespeare, maybe part of the reason that we admire him so much now, I mean, they admired him back in the day too, but like, we study him now. I'm thinking maybe part of that is because of how difficult it is, how needlessly complex the language is to us in a modern time. What do you think of that?
I think there's an element of truth in that. I think it's made more complex by the fact that it's written in a older style of English, and I think it would have been a lot more less complex for the people watching it at that time. But at the same time, it is like, we can still get it. So I'll take an excerpt here from one of my favorite parts. I'm not going to do the voice. I'm not Patrick Stewart. Go watch that version.
Jeremy Irons.
Yeah. If you want actual things. So, we have tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in the pretty face from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. So one of the things all he's doing here is he's saying something in a way that gets you to think in obviously you could say it like in a more simple manner. Yes. Okay. Simplicity is a virtue. Didn't you just say that, Jordan? Yes. But how can you say this in a way that gets the thought across, but in a creative manner? So he's not just showing it, he's actually elucidating. So tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow. This is a rhetorical device. Creeps in this pretty face from day to day. Again, we have a repetition. The last syllable of recorded time. Just the phrase to the last syllable of the recorded time, it's brilliant. In its the fact, like, it evokes so much more than what it's actually trying to say in this, the way he says this. So not only are we saying till the end of time, because you can say that, but the last syllable. Now, last syllable is written, recorded, so that's history. But it also evokes a thought that, like, till the last person in the world speaks his last breath, and you imagine that, and you're in this one sentence,
But it's also like it's not necessarily the end of all of time, it's just the end of human time. But
right.
It only implies it by not specifically saying the end of all time, it's the end of a syllable.
Right.
Because as long as humans exist, we will be making utterances. So
right.
It's subtle. That's what I like about it.
Subtle, but it's not overly cryptic. And this is kind of what I want to get into after. But the other thing about it is that if you read it properly, it sounds good just to say it. I just like reading some of his passages because they just flow off the tongue very well. And you just kind of like, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in the petty pace from sorry, I did this 3 times and I said it wrong and I'm reading it right in front of my face. So creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. That felt good to say. Now, we can't just read it. And that's, I think, the other thing with Shakespeare itself is that a lot of people make the mistake of reading Shakespeare. That's a good way to fall asleep. It's brilliant, but you have to watch it first and then go back and read it and be like, oh, yeah, I remember this part. Yeah. And then you get it. And so it becomes simpler. But then in that simplicity, it opens it up, because simplicity is also accessibility, which makes it so bland. I hate saying that. It says we need to make this more accessible, blah, 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 blah. It's just like, anyway. So one of the things that
as a promoter of like free education, though, I earnestly believe that we should be trying to make everything more accessible, even complex issues. But
I think education is becoming more accessible, whether the universities like it or not, and they don't. That's pretty obvious.
That's the thing. Our technology these days, we really don't need to make things accessible anymore. People could just put in the effort. And
yeah, there's a lot of gatekeeping, which is another episode.
Yes,
I'll take that down. But
another rant episode.
Those are always fun. So one of the things that's happening here, and I mentioned this, is that is one thing I learned while reading French, or not reading, but writing French poetry, because I took a French poetry class because I had one of the best professors in the school. He was a stubborn, forceful man who knew his stuff and really was into his work. And he was frustrating, and I thank every moment of his frustration and dissatisfaction with my work. So one of the things he did is that he had a way of showing the students why something was beautiful or why something was interesting, or sharing his enthusiasm for something, which is key to teaching. If you don't like what you're teaching, it's going to be a very difficult class to teach. But one of the things I noticed is that while writing, I could just make something cryptic. So one thing you can do is you can take a sentence, any sentence. Sorry about that. And so I have to go to the store. And then you can just add on layers of literary devices and, figures of speech and everything you want. I am going to the store. Well, what if I change it up and say, it is I who is going to the store? Okay, that's just, you're being more verbose. Okay, but what if I change the word store to metaphor? I'm going to the lake of nourishment. Okay, that's already getting dumb. Okay. Well, going is the verb here. So we can change the verb to an allusion or something like, I will be questing at the lake of nourishment. and it's just like, okay, this is not good poetry, but here's essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking a simple concept. Now, again, we have time and place. If you're telling someone you got to go into the store, you just tell them. But if you are writing a poem about going to the store, you can just keep adding on layers. Now, what happens if I add another layer? Questing. Okay, let's see here. Lake of nourishment. So reminds me of, maybe that's water. So I don't know.
An oasis.
An oasis. King Arthur's oasis awaits me, for the lady bringeth me upon my verbose shoulders that which I need to sustaineth me towards my ends. What the fuck is he talking about? Yeah. Just clapping triggers.
The thing is,
Jesus.
there's like depth and complexity, and there's art and complexity, and then there's just like frivolous, gratuitous, that egregious overuse of too many synonyms, like I just did.
Yeah.
Like, there's a level where you can add layers and it gives more interpretability to the thing you're communicating. And then there's a way of removing communication through the layers that you're adding on. And I think part of what bothers me about this style is that most people think that they read something that sounds like nonsense and think, oh, I can do that. And then they just write nonsense, like completely missing what the original intent of the piece was. And this is like especially pronounced in hip hop, I find, because like you can write a song that's got a really complex rhyming scheme, and you could be writing about like the school system, but you're speaking about a family drama or a woman drama or something, or like talking about a lot of rappers will talk about the music they love as if it was a physical love interest, and it's sort of the whole song carries forward a metaphor about like a relationship squabble, right? But like thinking that you could write a rap song just because you know how to rhyme 4-letter words that are spelt exactly the same with a different consonant in front of it, there's a reason it sounds stupid in the end, because coming out of it, there's no layers of depth to it. It's so shallow. It's just superficial words plotted together like you're throwing darts at a board.
Well, and like with, honestly, like I equate a lot of modern hip hop and music with as an extension of it's pretty much just poetry. Yeah, fight me. When it's done well.
I love that.
No, I'm talking to the audience.
Oh.
But and I've said this forever, and don't ignore good hip hop, because it's, they're using the words to most of the time when they're doing it right, and they're not just using a, with the 1-2 beat or whatever. I'm not a musician, but you're supposed to let the words themselves within the story you're telling drive the melody, or at least the
rhythm.
The rhythm, thank you, of the song or the poem, which is a hard thing to do, because like right now I'm just talking and I'm not worrying about the rhythm of what I'm saying. I do have a rhythm, but it's one that I usually use because it's easy to get my words across in this rhythm, and I can vary my rhythm, but I don't really generally think about it. And a poet or a rapper or a songwriter will note the rhythm that is inherent to the words, and this isn't complicated. It's just the thing there, dun dun. But then the thing plus the words that they have is a thing. So there's an inherent, without even giving it a beat, I'm adding a beat to it. Now, what happens is that when you look at the words themselves and you say something like, okay, he's just, we assume that someone's making art because most of us, well, if you're watching this, you're probably not one of these people, because you're actually, if you've gotten this far, but most of us, like, just because we make a podcast doesn't mean we're smart. It means we took time out of our day to actually do something.
Yeah, I mean, put the effort in.
Yeah. So like a lot of people, it's like, oh, you made a song? It's like, yeah, I sat down and wrote a song. Yeah, you wrote a book? Yeah, I actually sat down and just did it. A lot of people don't. It's like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. It's like, yeah, that's what people do. They do work. But, and they think that that's smart. But at the same time, you have that thing, oh, I'm just gonna write a song, or I'm just gonna do this, thinking that they don't need to actually try or practice, or do the massive amounts of trial and error that go along with it. And that gives authority to just the fact that there's a song there, and therefore you get a lot of complexity. Blah 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 blah. We're cheapening what we have, and we're seeing this with, like you said, the cheap rap songs, the cheap hip hop, the cheap pop. But there's always been cheap pop. There's always going to be cheap pop. That's okay. But
it's almost like looking at a Van Gogh.
Seriously.
Yeah, but it's almost like looking at a Van Gogh and saying, "Oh, look how many brushstrokes he made." If all I do is make a bunch of brushstrokes, I'm a Van Gogh. Like, it doesn't work like that. They're oversimplifying things that are intended to be complex, that are valuable because of their complexity.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, like, it applies to everything, like down to.
You see this especially in early 20th century classical music, because before that it was everyone was trying to evoke a feeling. Okay, I'm trying to do this. And you get Chopin and Liszt, who are just like, oh, look what I can do. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, and then Liszt is like, oh, look what I can do. Blah, blah, blah. And
jazz.
But then, yeah, you get jazz out of that. But at the same time, classical music, jazz and classical kind of did that. But you get like Ravel and the atonal guys, and then you get the like essentially just the what is even music? I'm going to use some weird stuff, but no one likes listening to it. It's garbage, because they were just going for the complexity. They were just going for the mathematical. It doesn't have any bearing. Like, it's not good music. It's it's art, I guess, but I don't want to listen to it because it doesn't jive with what I want to listen to. It doesn't have that simplicity that unlocks itself in my brain. It's just complex. It's a shotgun of complexity straight to my face. And it's also atonal. So like if I talked atonally, you would turn this off right now. But it's deep. But the thing you can do with that, and now I'm going to move on a bit, because I think I've labored that a bit, is that when you make something cryptic, what's happening is that, especially since 70s and 80s especially, what is necessary is like, oh, well, you need to understand the artist to get it, but like in my opinion, the art should kind of stand on its own. And then if you want to get deeper, then you go into the biography of the artist. But a lot of things, and I noticed myself doing when I started writing poetry, not posting any poetry beyond stuff I will scribble on Facebook. You will not get any of that. I'm sorry. I did a thing with a bunch of D's on Facebook recently, and I thought it was clever. That's as much as you're going to get. But one thing I did was I noticed that I was doing was I could just make it as cryptic as possible. The thing with something cryptic, and it comes from the word itself, crypt, or cryptology, is that I'm making a code. I'm encrypting my language, so it becomes illegible. And then the thing is that you need a keystone or a key to unlock it. And so you need to understand my personal experience in order to understand my poetry. Blah blah blah. Well, to some extent, but it helps to understand certain poets within the context, and then you read their poem, and then you're just like, oh, that was a nice poem. And then you read about their life, and you're like, I get it. But it's nothing more than he grew up in 40s America, or he was part of the civil rights movement, or he had a falling out with his dad, or something like that. Once you understand that, you get that. One was I think I brought this up a couple weeks ago. It was a dad, a kid who had those winter Sundays.
Was that Frost?
No.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I was just curious.
Robert Hayden. My Google foo is strong. So he's a Black American poet. So honestly, that was kind of racist to me. He's a great American poet. Doesn't matter what color he is. But when we analyze,
in addition to being Black,
but the poem itself had nothing to do with him being black. What happened was, what was important was that he had a bad relationship with his father. He didn't really realize that his father loved him until it was too late. That unlocks the poem. But you can get a sense of that from reading the poem itself.
And that's a relatable tragedy. Like, a lot of people grow up with that type of sentiment towards their families when they eventually have to watch their parents die.
Right.
But I think part of the expression is supposed to tell us that stuff.
Right. And you do get a sense of that. So, like, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and done his work and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? He didn't know that love isn't just, oh, I love you, hugs and kisses, blah, 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 blah. Like, love was his dad going to work. Love was only taking one day off a week. And love wasn't showing all that affection. Love is sometimes austere, and he only knew this later and wished he could tell his dad. You can get that from the poem. Then you go read the biography, it confirms everything, so it's like, oh, it's like checking your work. But if I am not given anything and it's just some gobbledygook going through, then cryptic does not equal poetic. You're being cryptic, and it's garbage. Try again. Might as well start again. But the thing is that we're getting used to this in society. Now, it's always been a thing. Like, I just admitted that I have this tendency, but I saw it in myself and I tried to correct it. And
I think we all do, though. That's what makes this conversation relatable to most people, is that we all have a tendency toward doing it.
Yeah. Because you can imagine yourself being like, oh, I'm going to say this and say that, say this and that. And it's like, well, that's going to make you look good, but that's not going to actually facilitate a conversation, which is why you're going to the party, to, meet people and talk to them, not to be like, everybody gather around. I'm going to be really smart right now. And you're all going to be like, wow, he's so smart.
There's like an underlying smugness to it where you're trying to deceive people into believing something about you that's just inaccurate. Like, if you're actually smart, you shouldn't have to try to show it to people. It should come out organically from your thoughts and expressions and feelings.
Keep thinking of Margaret Thatcher. If you have to be told you're powerful, well... Oh, she was a vicious woman.
But I think intent goes a long way, too, because when we don't realize we're doing it, it's probably a sign of a latent insecurity, first of all. So it's like a personality flaw that you're kind of ignoring and allowing yourself to ignore by continuing to do it without addressing it.
Yeah.
Without admitting it or being self-aware of it. But on the flip side, it's like, it's really disrespectful to the people you're deceiving. It's like, I'm so much smarter than you that I'm going to make you think I'm smart. Like, that's sort of the process, even if you're not explicitly saying it that way. That's the simple way of putting it when you're intentionally trying to make people believe something.
Yeah, and it is definitely an insecurity, and I've met a number of people like this. And I've been dealing with those demons for a while, but I think one of the things that it really comes out in is that when you're trying to do scholarship, it's extremely counterproductive. Okay, going to a party and talking about anthropology and being like not explaining what you're talking about to sound smart and making it all like high-minded, but that's a good way to not get laid at that party. Pro tip, there's a life hack for you. But the problem is that when you try and do your work like that, or when you try and stick in, like, the business world's got this forever where they have buzzwords and we're going to synergize this dynamic paradigm into blah, blah, blah. It's a joke by now, but that's essentially what's happening, is that synergizing the dynamic paradigm towards an end of capital in advancement in the field of business.
CompuGlobal MegaNet.
Yeah. Mega Hypernet.
Mega Hypernet.
So that's exactly it. But one thing that's happening is, one of the things is, when I got to school, when I passed all my poet courses and I went into history, this wasn't a definite progression. This was just kind of later on, was that, you start reading stuff and you're like, oh, this guy's got a really interesting analysis of this incident or this person or this event or something. And then you'll read something. I read one which was about the Atlantic slave trade. And we're like, okay, that was bad, obviously. Like, we don't really need to be convinced that the Atlantic slave trade was a bad thing. It's kind of like, that's why we stopped it, because it was bad. So we should have kept it going. Okay, you're going to have to come up with a good argument for that, because I'm not going to believe you. And one of the problems with it is that you don't really need to explain all this. But I read one article which was essentially just going on about the Venus in the boat and how she was stifled and silenced by the way that people took photos in a certain way on, and that instituted a enforcement of imperialism in the Caribbean and early America. It's like, okay, after digging into that, we already knew that, but I don't know why you have to call female suffering the denigration of the Venus in a scholarship article. Or one of them was overcomplicating the idea of an empire. Now, what is an empire? Just generally, it's a
domineering faction over a greater number of a smaller, less powerful people.
Well, yeah, it's generally a polity that has
it's a master-slave relationship between groups.
Well, yeah, I think it's when a government has dominion over people that don't subscribe to their dominion. So like the Roman Empire and the Greeks. The Greeks weren't Roman, but the Romans were in charge.
Like the Brits in India.
The Brits in everywhere. Although the British colonies ended up a lot better. Anyway.
Colonialism is basically empiricism.
It was.
As far as I'm concerned.
When I read a number of articles explaining it in more and more and more and more complicated ways, and it actually just made it harder to understand what the British Empire was. And so you get people who are trying to not do that, and then they're called, oh, you're racist, or oh, you must be a Britishist. It's like, I think we need to look at history a little more dispassionately than, trying to explain why it was the most evil thing and making it more and more evil. We know it was a bad thing for a lot of people. So can we move on and discuss that? But no, it's like, so you come up with ideas of trans empire and, periphery and, metropole relationships, and how the metropole, influenced this, and there was, all this stuff, and you have periphery relationships forming that actually inform what the metropole is. And like, duh. Like stuff, they take over Canada and India, and then they bring back spices and beavers, and that changes the culture of it. Why is this a 20-page paper? Why did I have to read a 20-page paper? And the worst offender of this, bar none, in my experience, was Spivak. So Spivak was my word salad gauntlet. So Gitari Chakravorty Spivak, who is she's an Indian literary theorist, sits down on the stage a lot. She's a feminist, but it took 3 times the amount of the time to get through one of her papers than any other paper that I have gotten through. And essentially all I got from it in like a 40-page paper of just hell. Go look it up. It's beyond word salad. It's like pureed kale smoothie.
Try reading one of these machine learning white papers that come out. There's like 1,000 of them every week, and they're all talking about like the same concepts, but they're using the most arcane, abstract versions of definitions throughout their entire papers, and nobody's consistent with them. So 2 people will call up like perceptrons, transformers, and others will call activations, functions, layers, and like they just mix things up just for the sake of sounding unique so they can get published. And I think that's one of the hard problems with jargon is on the one hand, you want scientific papers to be very specific, but on the other hand, they're doing the exact opposite by all choosing their own definitions of words.
Well,
like you have to learn new languages for every paper you write.
Well, that's exactly right. And
that's not simple or specific. Like it defeats its own purpose.
One of the things that's even worse about that is that you get, I'm just getting flashbacks from having it up here. So like you have jargon and there's jargon. But then there's people that want to, like one thing I was told with this particular paper, I think it was Writing Wrongs. Might have been a different one, but I've read a couple of her papers. Yay. I like suffering. But is that, I was told that people, there's scholars spending their entire careers deciphering what she's written. Like she was some kind of sage who knew everything. But I got through it and I figured out that all she was saying is that some people in history don't have a voice in history because they are subject to the race, or not race, but class and race and all these types of people, and that people should form their own pronouns, essentially. This is where that came from. Well, one of the places where that came from. So, and I got that from like a 3-4 hour, reading of this. And I was like, is that it? Is that all there is to it? It just boils it down to some people in history don't have a voice. And I was like, duh. Like I might not have a voice in history. Like the records, like I could die and then all the Edmonton records and Winnipeg records could just there could be a fire and then my name could be erased from history. That easy. Like that. I'm not even oppressed. I'm not even part of well, I was, but I'm not even part of the underclass. And I could be erased just like that. And I don't know. I guess that's part of like philosophically I have to come to terms with that, in a very, stoic way. But at the same time, this is to me, this is an absolute farce of scholarship. And it bugs me because they are claiming authority based on complexity, and they're not actually writing or saying anything new. And that...
Or complex.
Well, no, yeah. So when you decipher it, so like, yeah, it's like a puzzle. You get to decipher it and you get to pull it apart, but then it's a
smiley face instead of like a cathedral. You're like, oh, that's it.
Right.
It's so disappointing.
But you contrast that with someone like Shakespeare and it's like, oh, it's just a story about a guy trying to be king and then he gets stabbed. Okay, but let's dig in a bit deeper. Okay, there's a lot more here. So that's the thing. And I know people are gonna be like, well, you didn't read Marx properly or you didn't do this, but like there's a I forget her name. There was one feminist author from the 90s who won like the worst sentence award for in philosophy in 1996 or something. And it's just in philosophy, but like you get people like this and they hide a lot of what's happening here. Is it not just makes you look like you're super smart and you should trust me, I have authority on these matters, I've gone like a year and a half through a 4-year degree. It's like, oh wow, you must be really intelligent because you've bought the book that you're supposed to be reading. But then at the same time, there's also it's kind of a gatekeeping in itself.
So but why even bother? Like, what's the point of showing people how smart you are? I never understood that, why people even do it. Like, yeah. I do it because I like the artistic, flowery nature of
you like to play with language. And
yeah, but that's just me. It's a personal preference. But there are people who don't like language who do it. Mm-hmm. That's what I don't get. Like, why even bother trying to show people something that doesn't matter?
It gets some social capital, which is one of their...
Not if people walk away, though. Like, yeah,
but like,
by doing
if 100 people walk away and you get 3 sycophants telling you you're great, well, who's going to be louder in that person's head? The sycophants are, oh, you're so wonderfully smart. Now, if someone is lucky enough to have no sycophants come up and they have to actually review their work or to see the sycophants for what they are. Oh, you're so smart. And like people who are like, this person's smart, I'm gonna ride on their coattails. But at the same time, there's a bit of like, there is that, you can, like you said before, there's psychological things going on there that they probably just need help. But I'm not saying like everyone who does this is suffering from a psychological condition, but like,
no, I think we all do it. That's the funny thing.
We all do it, and it's we need to get past it. And like getting help means like, I think I'm a narcissist. It's like, now one of the things is like, I knew I had narcissistic tendencies. Like I'm wearing a collar, I'm got my hair all done. I don't have it done. I'm just keep pushing it over. Like my beard's trimmed. You look great, by the way. Because one of the things is that there's a line between like well-groomed and narcissism. And I try not to cross over. But you have to be aware of it. But on the other side of it,
self-care is also important just for mental health maintenance. You know what I mean? Like looking after your body is a healthy thing to do.
Right.
It's just like when you die because you're staring at your reflection for so long that it's a bad thing. Yeah.
And like having really nice muscles is a bonus, but now I get to go and do things with those muscles, and I don't get to, I gotta go walk to the store, and I'm not going to huff and puff by the time I'm halfway there. That's a pretty neat bonus.
So is it virtue signaling though, or is it like begging for unearned or unmerited virtue? Like when people are doing this subconsciously or consciously. What?
Are those things separate?
Well, because I think they kind of are.
Because like if I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to get in hell for this, but like, you see at the hockey games now, they're saying, oh, look at how good we're doing this. We're acknowledging this or that, or like you get tribal land declarations, which don't help. And they're not
fixing or addressing the problem. They're just stating it where they never stated before.
Right. So it's the most shallow thing, but it makes them look good. And this is a bit of a virtue signal. But at the same time, you get someone like the Robin DiAngelo wrote White Fragility. Okay, now I'm showing my colors here. But but like that book was an awful mess of nonsense. And it has an element of that complexity but it's mostly just self-flagellation. And what ends up happening is you get a signal to everybody that, look, this is what's right. This is what's going on. And here's what you need to understand if you're white. And I'm just like, okay. But that is a sign, like, follow, I am intelligent. Look at this. Now follow my philosophy. So I'm showing you with the authority that I have, but it's complicated. So and she brings up a bunch of like very difficult people to read, and some other things that, just how many Marxists have actually read Marx, or how many postmodernists have actually read Foucault and Derrida. I barely got through Derrida, and I'm not going through it again. Don't make me.
Well, it's like Heidegger and Hegel never get discussed either. And like whenever you're talking, especially with philosophers, you mentioned earlier how like the philosophers have a tendency to fall into word salads to try and more what's the word for making something more ambiguous. They obfuscate the actual realities they're discussing intentionally, so that people don't have anything to criticize them for.
Thought Wittgenstein was like that, but then I read him a bit more and I was like, okay, this guy's worth reading. But like Wittgenstein was out there. He was in the rough. And Bertrand Russell knew that when he was bringing him up. But like you get like later on, he wasn't trying to obfuscate it. He was like he was going out there into the abstract and seeing what was there. I know if you know Wittgenstein better than me, tell me in the comments and, confirm or deny.
Ludwig's the man.
He's pretty good. But later on you get Foucault and Derrida and Lacan, all these guys, and they are impossible to read. And you get, I can't remember her name. I think it's Susan Arendt.
Never heard of her.
I'll if I can remember, I'll bring it up later. But one of the things is that it does is that it ends up being a bit of a gatekeeping. and you say, okay, well, you don't understand because, you know, you obviously didn't read it well. And it makes it intentionally, you know, it obfuscates it, as you say, but that ends up making it kind of this thing that you can form a approved interpretation of around it. Well, here's what we believe this says, and therefore here's how we're going to construct our form of scholarship. So you have people with regard, so they thrive on the complexity and the obfuscation, kind of like a bank does. It's like, well, how do you guys work? Oh, it's so complex. Don't worry about it. Just put your money in your account and don't worry about it.
That's exactly what banks do.
And so we're doing this to our students too. We're saying, you know, it's like, okay, what does this mean? Oh, well, you're not there enough. Just start a conversation, you know, just
like a pat on the head. Like you're not there. You're not at our level, but that's okay. We'll help you.
Yeah. Just say these things and you'll be fine. You'll get an A. And so it becomes this almost priesthood, I guess, where, you know, the Catholic Church used to do this, and they're very guilty for this, where they would have sermons in Latin. Why would you have it in Latin? How many people speak Latin? Well, the Catholic knew that it was not very many. And so that's why they worked in Latin so often, was because they could be like, oh, Latin talk, I don't know any Latin words.
A priori ipso facto Deus Domine.
Lorem ipsum. So
read off the lorem ipsum text.
Yeah. So they go there and be like, oh, wow, there's magic happening there. And now we've talked about magic, and you've all heard me talk about magic. If there's a magic there, then you can, you know, claim anything. You say, oh, well, I'm doing all these, you know, arcane rituals. And you can do the same thing with scholarship. It's like, oh, the key to solving oppression is in these texts, is in these sacred texts. You know, you're not allowed to say anything bad about these guys because they were the ones that first noticed that, you know, anybody could be anything, and, you know, everything's a class war, but it's really not. It's a race war, but it's really not. It's an identity war, but it's really not. You should be able to have sex with anyone, but not. It's like, and
in the end, it all comes down to power and money.
Yeah, and that's so depressing. There's a reason I stopped going down that path, because I was just like, power and money, which I have neither. I could go Rage Against the Machine, which was fun when I was a teenager.
That takes us to the simplicity, though. For me to boil it down to power and money, that actually is a statement in very few words that accentuates an actual issue or subject that is complex.
Right.
The complexity of human interaction. Right? But like, to break it down,
the plight of the American Venus. So, but
to break down complexities, we should be using a whole series of simple statements, in my opinion. Like it should only be after we've got this backlog of all these simple statements that describe one complete thought that we then slap on an ism to it and refer to it as an ism, like a variable in a code. Just so you don't have to re-describe everything in the simplest terms because it takes too long. But for people to start out at the complex thought and then just memorize all the things that it's supposed to mean, like, oh, what's solipsism? Oh, it has something to do with the self. And then they memorize the definition of it without actually listening or reading any of the solipsistic thinkers. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're teaching it backwards. We're teaching people the isms, and then we're teaching people how we got to the ism, rather than teaching the ideas and thoughts. And then saying, okay, now all of these things we just studied in the last 6 hours, that's this word. That, to me, is how we should be teaching it. But you're a teacher, so what do you think of that?
Well, that's generally right, because if you follow the Socratic method, you don't want to make it hard. You don't want to be like, well, blah, 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 15 minutes later, which I'm guilty of because sometimes I like following my logic paths. But generally, you don't want to go too far. You want them to follow their logic path on their own. So you make a statement like, what is a frog? And then they're like, okay, it's the green thing. Okay, so if I draw a picture of a green frog, is that a frog? Well, that's a picture of a frog on a piece of paper. Okay. And you can follow this and you can keep it simple all the way through. And all of a sudden you have this understanding of, it's like, okay, what we just did was an exercise in Platonism. And then, well, what makes a frog, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now you understand Platonism. You understand this or that. Okay. I know I didn't do the whole thing, everybody, if you want to, but, or you can follow like syllogistic logic, which is kind of annoying sometimes, but like, it's just a series of simple statements that go to prove each other, and you can like bring out the math to it and make it as complicated as you want. But one of the things that we've done even on this channel is, start from first principles, is where, you can start from something that's simple, something we know. You start from something, okay, something like evil. It's like, oh, evil is this very amorphous. What does it mean? Is it evil to do this? Is it evil to do nothing? Blah, blah, blah. Like, is it evil? Like, okay, let's start with it. Pain is bad. Pleasure is good. Well, not always. Okay, but these are simple. Like, everyone can understand these. Okay, so if pain is bad, but some pain is good, then bad pain is bad. Okay.
What makes a bad pain?
Yeah.
And then you can kind of branch off into all the segments that it leads. Right.
And like the whole is complex, but you're following these simple paths, and that's one thing you can do. Now, sometimes you'll be writing an entire, you'll have a thought, like a big philosophical idea, and you'll have to explain it, and you won't have the luxury of being simple because you're so close to the edge. But once you write it and get your idea down, like this is what I'm trying to say. Go through it again, and then you simplify it. You make it less cryptic. You flesh it out. You use better words. You do this and that. Editing is supposed to be doing that. Now, I know a lot of these, like Spivak and a lot of the other postmodernists are guilty of, well, no, this is my truth as I spoke it, so I don't need editing. It's just obviously.
But even like kids in school, like being taught in universities, right? They write filler. They say, oh, the teacher said that my assignment had to be 5 pages long. They write a 2-page paper and fill it up. And to me, that's ass backwards. Because if you have a complete thought, you should be able to put your entire thought into 1 page, and then to make it coherent, you expand it to 5 pages so that it's legible. So you're not jumping all over the place, and you actually, you preemptively put in criticisms that will be brought up, or misunderstandings. You squash them before they're misunderstood. Like, that kind of thing isn't filler to me, because it's additive. It provides more substance and context to the things you're saying, as opposed to just making blanket statements or brushing with broad strokes. You're defining specifically what you mean by that sentence in every paragraph, is basically a reinforcement of the sentence itself. But it's like the filler we're writing in our papers now is just to make it a certain length, as opposed to actually expanding on ideas. I don't know if you found the same thing, but I think people are going about their assignments backwards.
Yeah.
They should be writing a complete thought and expanding it to whatever the length of the assignment is, rather than finding the length of the assignment and just filling up that many pages.
Well, yeah. So that's one of the things I generally teach, is like, keep it simple. In the introduction, use this sentence to say what you're going to say. Tell a joke here. Tell me what sources you're going to be using here. Tell me how you're going to be using them. Like, I don't know what I'm going to be saying. Well, then let's go to the body. Make a point here, make a point here, make a point here, have them all connected. Tell me what you're thinking at the end. Oh, that sounds hard. Well, yeah, you have to actually, the whole thing is that you can't just start with, I've got to write 5 pages. The whole point is, I have to explain this thought. Yeah. And that's where you want to start. So if you're starting with going to, you're engaging in something social, and you want to sound smart. So you go in, it's like, oh, I want to sound smart to pick up chicks or something. No, guys would never do that. Well, you've never met a guy then, have you?
But isn't it easier for that guy to just actually learn something? Because then he can use that new thing he learned on every girl he ever meets after that. Like, it's so much less work to just actually learn something that's intellectual than to pretend you're intellectual without learning.
Right, because intellectual sounds like, oh, he's smart. And that means like, oh, intellectuals make money. It's like, but like at the same time, you get that.
The jokes are just better. The smarter you are, the funnier you are.
Well, it's like in the 19th century, you got that idea that, a good wife, okay, this is going to sound bad, but when you think about it, it's really not. A good wife is someone who's well read enough to be able to hold a conversation with their husband. My word. But so it was, you see in all these like Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte and all these books, which were
Ayn Rand.
No, that was 20th century.
Well, close enough.
But I'm thinking more of the romantic 19th century novels, where there's like, here's what it is to find a man, and here's what it does. A good woman, this is what a good woman is like. And, they have all these bad women who go off and with soldiers they shouldn't be going off with, or you have like...
yeah, that's the exact type of thing that Ayn Rand was bucking against when she wrote. She was constantly trying to like put dirt on that.
Everyone's been trying to put dirt on that kind of stuff. But the thing is that those like the Bronte sisters and Shelley and Jane Austen were right. Men do like a woman they can talk to, and they show that in the books. But the thing is that like feminism and Ayn Rand, I kind of want to stay away from that because I've never actually engaged with her work at all.
Oh, that explains it. Yeah, no, it screams out loud when you read her stuff. Just like power to the woman.
Yeah, I should. Okay, maybe
you definitely should check her out.
I really should. I've been avoiding her because she's kind of anathema to the left, which I was definitely a part of for a long time. So maybe I should get in.
Anyway, sidetrack.
They're so thick. So essentially one of the things is that these women, these ideal wives of the 19th century, were expected post Wollstonecraft, OG feminist, worth reading, who were expected to be their own person, not because this isn't really about feminism. It's these women were expected to have something of their own to say and be able to engage with their men on an equal footing. And so you learn about stuff that you can bring to the table in a conversation because people like to be able to talk to their significant other. Go figure. They're not just an object of silent, seen but not heard. And there were those men in those stories, but they're always kind of like the jerks, and because they were moral tales. But at the same time, this goes for everybody. Like if you can learn the language of intellectualism without actually learning anything. And the point that we're making in such a long-winded fashion is that what are you actually trying to say rather than the show of you saying it is important. So like what we're trying to say here in such long-winded, well, we got a lot of time, we can dive in deeply, is that if you focus on the thing itself and try and pose it in a way that everyone can understand, or like people can like understand with a bit of work, not everyone's going to get it. That doesn't matter though. But you are talking to those people and you want, communication is literally, I'm going to take what's in here and put it into your head in the most effective way possible. Now, if that's not happening, or if it's only happening with an exclusive cadre of a few, or if it's only happening with regard to those that are in my work, intellectual or social group, well, okay, that's all right. But at the same time, if I can explain something that I want people to understand, or what I'm like, and make an argument and everyone gets it, whether or not they agree with me doesn't matter. I've said my piece in the most effective way I can. And the thing that you need with that is simplicity, because it's already complex and you have to boil what's in your head down, because a lot of what's your thoughts that are happening in your head aren't words. You're not thinking in words. You're thinking in impressions. You're thinking in images. You're thinking in feelings. You are thinking in words sometimes, but it's a jumble of everything. And getting that from in here to a page or to a sentence takes practice. And the thing you need to have is something to say and stuff to back it up and the ability to say it. So I can say whatever I want. I can explain.
And the open-mindedness to correction. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Like, there's no point in communicating anything if you're not willing to receive an opposing point of view. Because Otherwise, you could just talk to a mirror and you'd literally not be any worse or better off. You need to be responsive as well as part of communication. And I think that comes down to a lot of like what we do when we're communicating, whether verbally or non-verbally, is relational. It's connecting to other people who are extraneous to ourselves. The most intimate connection we have is with ourselves, being in our own bodies and party to our own experiences uniquely. But when we communicate our own experiences and thoughts, it's a connection outside of ourselves, like you were saying. I think that's really important to note too, because a disingenuous or a dishonest type of communication is basically slighting yourself of the connection you're trying to make, and at the same time.
Yeah, it's
like you're shortchanging your own experience with other people by having disingenuous experiences in communicating, or by not receiving their communications intentionally, or by misrepresenting yourself in your communications to others.
Which is extremely ironic, because
it is so ironic.
If you're doing it, then the whole purpose of you taking offense at it is self-centered.
Just like having a long conversation about simplicity.
Yeah. Well,
it's just beauty and irony.
Oh, this is one of the more ironic things. Well, like our humor episode, and how was that actually funny?
More ironic? Is that moronic?
I don't know.
Moronic?
It's going to be iconic, that's for sure. It's probably just going to come across as laconic. Okay.
Diphthong.
Shit.
Diphthonic.
So,
with that though, let me ask you something else then. Just
before we move on, I did find out who it was.
Oh, who's that? It was
Judith Butler. So I have a passage here, and this is a good example of this to top off what we were talking about. The circular inclusion of indigenous perspectives is differentially problematic if we cannot also attend to the taken for granted, one word, and naturalized epistemological / ontological and axiological, no commas, commitments, enactments of what we are including perspectives into. Oh, there's a whole bunch of these. Oh, there's an even worse one.
So racism's bad.
Yeah. The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relations in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and rearticulation brought the question of temporality into the thinking of structure and marked a shift from a form of Althusian theory that takes structural totalities as theoretical objects to one in which insights into the contingent possibility of structure, inaugurate and renewed conception of hegemony is bound up with the contingent sites and strategies of their rearticulation of power. There is one period in that entire thing.
But again, that entire sentence could be summarized by it's bad to control other people, and there's evidence of control being had.
Yeah, that's it. But no, I need to get every aspect. And one of the things I found, before we move on, is that, and I've seen this in a lot of scholars worrying about their paper or worrying about their thesis, is that there's a tendency for someone writing to try and fit everything into a work. Oh, I need to keep this in there. I need to shove this in there. I need to get this in there. And one of the things that's something you have to resist, because it will burden your prose immensely. You need to only say what you are trying to say. Nothing else. You're not trying to get the entirety of all creation into your paper. If you want something to say, write another paper. I left so much out of my thesis because it's like, this is cool, not important. This is neat, not important. This would be really helpful, but getting it in there would not be. So I ditched it, and I ditched a lot. I must have ditched like 100 pages worth of stuff. But it would have been completely counterproductive. There was one guy in my faculty who had been in there for 8 years because he just kept adding. Oh, we need to put this in. We need to put this is important. It's like, either make it a book or write 7 papers and move on. You need to move on with your life.
That's a really common problem for authors, actually. It's because they feel like they put the energy, they invested the time and energy. It feels like almost like a loss or a waste once it's thrown out. I sort of addressed that with one of the characters in my book too, because I thought it was really funny that I came to that. I'm like, why do I even care? It's just text on a paper. Like, I can write more words.
Yeah.
But like, there's a personal attachment to things you put energy into. I think we talked about the IKEA effect a little bit last time. It might have something to do with it.
But moving on is that I think this might have been where you're going to go. But what can you do to actually be simpler?
Well, I was going to ask you something else first, if I could.
Okay, yeah, let's go into that then, yeah.
Sorry, the reason being is just for organization of thought. I want to sort of pin on something you've already said, and it leads into that. So
you've got a plan. Let's do your plan.
I do have a plan, yeah.
I'm sorry. You've got a dynamic that will better facilitate the discourse of our socially and racially engendered perspectives with regard to the podcast in the
Where's my noose?
Yeah, right.
Where did I put that noose?
Yeah.
No, I was going to ask you about people's use of complexity as an excuse to not know things. I wanted to get to that because what I've noticed in my day-to-day casual experiences with other people, which is rare because I don't have many friends, but when I do speak with my friends, I make it Dos Equis. No, I'm just kidding. The excuse not to know really bugs me because it's like the fact that there is complexity shouldn't be reason for people to not participate or engage, or you know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't be an aversion. You shouldn't walk away from complexity just because things are complex. And part of what we're saying here is we should keep things simple and not over complexify things. But on the same token, there's the risk on the other side is always to oversimplify. So maybe you could talk a bit about oversimplification. Not just that simplicity is good, but also when simplicity is bad.
Yeah.
Or like how people use it as a tool for escapism or to justify anxieties or, personal tendencies and flaws can be stimulated by it.
Scholarship is hard. Like, not just like, I go to university scholarship. No, like anyone can do scholarship. If you're interested in a topic, you can go to the library and read up on the topic. It takes effort. You have to go to the library. You have to find the books.
Internet. It really doesn't take any effort.
Yeah, but it is effort, but like you have to like.
That's the mentality though. That's too hard or it takes too much effort.
Yes. The thing is that in like the archives where it's like, how do we get people into the archive? It's like, problem isn't getting them in. The problem is what happens when they're there. Because what happens when you're there is you bring them a box full of stuff and you're like, there you go. And they're like, what are you going to do? It's like, you need to read what's in that box. Go through the box. You have 30 more boxes to go after this that you ordered. What do you mean? Yeah, it's like, now you have to do all the study. Now, the thing is that that's complex. And I think a lot of what's happening is there is it's okay if you don't get it. Now, okay, yeah, you don't need to understand complex calculus. It helps, honestly. But I wish I did. But at the same time, we're in education, we have that. Now, when I say simplicity, I don't mean like dumb, because simplicity is actually, in my opinion, a little more difficult in some ways, because it takes a bit of effort to bring it down to that. And I think there's a difference between simplicity and ignorant, because you have Isaac Asimov, who noticed a trend in like the 50s and 60s, which is probably a universal trend. Said like there's a growing tendency in our society where people will assume that their ignorance is better than another's intelligence, and so we see this a lot. And so
especially with COVID.
Yeah, and it's pretty universal. You get that like hierarchy of competence, or the
Peter principle.
Yeah. But at the same time, we're also saying that, no, it's okay if you're having trouble with this now. It's okay. You don't need to put the work in. It's like, well, then when are you going to do it? This is grade 1. It's time to get to work. Like, I'm not saying like, grade 1 kids should be like, no, that is the perfect time for them to be learning their ABCs and stuff. And it's like, well, grade 9, I was told I was let off real easy. I was having a lot of problems, but at the same time, you get German kids in and they know calculus already in grade 10. And you're just like, okay, wait, what's going on? They're telling us that, don't need to put the work in. There's a bit of mollycoddling going on. And because this stuff is hard, and hard stuff hurts. You have to read a book and it sucks, and you have to get through the next book and it sucks, but you have to get that paper done. So you get through it, and it wasn't pleasurable at all. And you didn't even like reading the stuff but even though like the professor likes it, you don't like it, but you get through it. And I'm saying part of this is kind of like suck it up. But at the same time, a lot of it is, granted, it maybe not be your thing. You're not allowed, not everyone needs to be an expert and doesn't need to put all the effort in the world into it. But if you signed up for something and you're not willing to put the work in to understand the complexities of something, and then have the audacity to speak towards that without having read the paper, looking at you, History 3990, then what's the point? So
can I word this maybe a slightly different way then?
Yes, please make this more simple.
I think the virtue in simplifying things comes from knowing a whole bunch about it and reducing it to something that's communicable.
Bam.
Whereas being simple for the sake, because you don't know everything else, is not as virtuous, let's say. And to pretend something that is simple is more complex than it actually is, without even knowing the complexity of it, to me is like even one layer lower on the virtue scale. So what I think we should strive for is the type of simplicity that comes from a competent awareness that's reduced, as opposed to an ignorance that's amplified.
Well, you realize what you just did there is what you just said, which is beautiful. But
yes, I like poetry. We've covered this.
But because what you just described is exactly what we've been doing. I said something. I had a thought that I needed to put together, and I wasn't put together particularly properly. I was bringing in a bunch of stuff.
But it's because of your open thinking that I could articulate it differently.
So what we've been doing is observation, bringing in a bunch of evidence, coming to a conclusion, analyzing a conclusion, simplifying and altering it, and then going, here's what we found. And we definitely do that. So if you don't go to the end of our podcasts, please do the end.
Yeah, that's what people are missing in the production here. It's not about the random conversation. It's about the progression.
Yeah, unless you think we're gorgeous, in which case, like, call us. Yeah. Yeah, we take Bitcoin.
I will do shows for comments.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I think that is a good way of putting it too, because you say something and then you try and say it again better, and then you try and say it again better. But strangely, that refinement of it being simple, being more simple and having more brevity has more nuance, because you've gone through that gauntlet of, critique and rewriting and erasing.
Drudgery.
Yeah, and that's hard. It sucks. Editing's the worst.
I hate it.
Absolute worst. But it's so necessary. Anybody who says you don't need editing, that's a bit suspect. You ask them what they mean, because...
And that's usually the part you're most proud of when you have a finished work, is all the edited content that you did, because you got it right, even though it was painful to do.
Right. So, yeah, it's... And then... what you're boiled down to is now you have, if you've put that work in to understand something complex, and then you boil it down, you've been thinking about it, you have something in your head, and now you have it forever. That's something that you can explain to everybody forever. You put the work in and you've gained something, instead of just learning by rote. Like it's one thing to learn what the Bible says. A lot of Christians do this. I'm going to make a lot of enemies right now. I'm making a lot of enemies lately.
And Hebrews and Muslims do it too, so we might as well get everyone on the train.
Yeah, the Moisin just essentially yells out the Quran, and without anybody actually thinking what it means. I said it.
Well, they have to memorize it to do their prayers too. Every time they get called a prayer, it's a memorized surahs usually, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But if you memorize like a passage of the Bible and don't actually understand what it means and don't think about it just from a memorization, are you actually a Christian? And that's kind of where I'm sitting, is that if you know all the things to say to get an A in a class, but then you get out into the world and you're useless, does your degree mean anything? No, it doesn't. You're just a person who learned the tricks.
But they learn to do what they're told. Like the questions on the test tell you exactly how to get the answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have, a yard that's 45 by 60 feet, and you got to make a fence, and the fence has to be 6 feet high. They give you the information and the goal and the objective, and they tell you figure it out. And then you memorize a formula that they use with these types of questions, and you just plug the numbers in. But to me, that's not learning math. Like when you have to design a neural network using graph nodes and stuff, like nobody's going to be holding your hand showing you how to write an algorithm.
Right.
You should know it by then.
They try and that's one thing that pedagogy right now is absolutely abysmal. They're trying to do all this new stuff and we need to do new stuff. It's like, stop trying to trick your students.
Yeah. But it's all hand holding.
It is. Well, and then on tests, they try and trick them. This is one thing I'm having to do with.
Multiple choice, yeah.
It's like, oh, what's the trick in this thing? What's the trick? Well, what's this? What, is there, there's always some, thing. And it's just like, no, I'm asking you to think and then come up with an answer. Whether or not it's right will be in the discussion after the answer. But, and then at the same time, you have that hand holding. And so I forgot where I was going to go.
Well, I think that sort of leads us into what you were about to say before I cut you off earlier, about how to go about simplifying properly. So how do we implement more simplicity in our lives?
First principle, say what you mean. Don't cloud it. Don't try and be poetic. You can be poetic later.
Yeah, if you're writing poetry, be poetic. But if you're communicating to people, don't.
That doesn't mean be a robot either. Practice saying things a little differently. And if you can say something, say it in an interesting way. But at the same time, don't say it in a, cryptic way. But say what you mean first, and then go and be creative after. So
get to the point, man.
And there's a difference between that and being we've all met actors and artists who are just
heads in the clouds.
Yeah, it's dude, you're not actually that creative, are you? And
I sometimes like to cut out pictures from magazines and put them together in a scrap. I call it a scrapbook. I don't know if anyone else does. I invented that, but
I've met actual poets and artists, actual ones, and they're deep in their stuff and they're willing to gauge beyond it. But you see someone who's just enjoying being an artist or being an actor or being avant-garde or something. And it's just okay, it's not about the thing in itself. But with simplicity, it's just, you want, one thing that I try and do in my life is ignore everything that doesn't matter. Say what you're trying to say and take things at face value. So these are 3 things to start with, but at the same time, don't the hardest thing is don't overcomplicate your life. What are you doing? What's in front of you? And what do you need to be doing? Why are you doing that? Are you suffering because this or that? But essentially, we put a lot of stuff in front of our faces to hide what we actually don't want to think about. So, you go on a date. Did she like me? Did she not? Did she blah, blah, blah? Well, let's boil it down to its simple points. Did it seem like she had fun? Well, yeah, but I can't trust that. Well, maybe you should ask her. This is a simple solution. Or you could just wait till the next date. If you screw up, well, you found one date, you could probably find another.
Or let her tell you if she's unhappy.
Yeah.
If she doesn't communicate it, it's not your fault.
And or, you get called into the boss's office. Oh, what did I do? You know what you did. Or maybe you don't. They're laying you off from something you can't handle. But either way, it's happening. And to me, life got a lot easier when I decided to just stop trying to be cryptic and poetic and, show off and stuff like that. And I think the problem is that you see people. No, sorry, not the problem. 'Cause one thing I was noticing was there was a girl at work that I worked with forever ago, and she's not even going to watch this. If she does, I don't even think she'll remember it. But it's just like, I made an offhand remark to someone else while she was off doing something. And I was like, she's a simple girl, isn't she? And they're like, oh, how could you say that? It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, that's not an insult. And the reason it's not an insult is because that girl, though, was a very...
What was the insult?
It's simple. I just called her a simple girl.
Mm.
And so, like, you call someone simple, it's like you're calling them dumb. Now, I was aware of this, but I wasn't thinking about it because I was just saying it offhand. I was just, I'm tired. And I'm just like, man, she's pretty simple. It's like, oh, how could you say that? Now, to me, that's okay. Yeah, it's an insult. I'm not going to ignore the fact that it's like, oh, I didn't know. It's like, no, I wasn't thinking too hard about what I was saying.
It used to be a way of calling people dim-witted. Back when you couldn't swear on TV and but PG was everywhere.
You get the notion of a simpleton, is an idiot. But the thing is that I had noticed in this person that there wasn't anything other than what you were seeing. There wasn't much, like there wasn't a, elephantine amount of, other stuff. She wasn't some complicated person, but at the same time there wasn't anything hidden. There wasn't any there was an honesty to it, and there wasn't anything there's no
marketing. It's just true and
right
description of herself
and
presentation, I should say.
Yeah, there was what's the word I'm looking for? There wasn't any look over here. No.
Yeah, the sleight of hand.
The sleight of hand to show you what I want to show you, or to do this, or a lot of people will put on an air of happiness to show that, look, I'm not unhappy. Let's not talk about unhappiness. I don't want to deal with it. This person would show their unhappiness, but like just went about their life. And I thought, okay, there's something there. But that wasn't the first time I had noticed that. But why should I worry about what people think of me when I don't even know what I think of me? So I cultivate my own self before I worry about how people are seeing myself.
But why would somebody take offense just like knee-jerk reaction? Like, to me, as a Buddhist, I would consider simplicity would be like achieving nirvana or being enlightened. Like, simplicity would be the thing that makes you even spiritually more human or more...
Well, it makes sense to take as an insult because in English it's easier to construe that as an insult than not.
But why do we keep saying intelligence is so important to people's value? I don't get that. I see no difference between a smart person and a dumb person as a value of a human being. If somebody's simple, it's no different from saying they're ugly. They just are. Like,
well, I'm
who cares?
Relatively
it's superficial.
Intelligent. Well, I think intelligence is correlated with capability. And sometimes, like, if you get someone with an IQ of like 70, then you're going to need a lot of taking care of. But like, that doesn't mean they don't have.
But they're not lesser people.
No, of course
it's not an insult to be dumb.
People,
it's just, you're dumb.
But the thing is that like I can't engage as much with like. I was looking for a very intelligent wife when I was looking for a wife because I knew that I'd get more meat out of my life because...
What you really mean, though, is that you want a wife who's intelligent relative to you. Not because she's not a good enough person if she's not intelligent, right? Like, this is what I mean. Like, the core essence of people...
I'm not making a value judgment, but we do... Like, if I'm hiring, I will look for intelligence.
If you take offense to being called simple, I would say that would have to be a value judgment for it to be offensive, right?
Yeah. Well, people are worried about other people, what if they find out I'm actually an idiot? Well, guess what? We're all idiots.
Yeah, together. You better hope that nobody notices.
Yeah.
Like, please. Even the smartest people are dumb sometimes. Like, Einstein was terrible at helping his friend's grieving widow. Oh, yeah. Don't worry. In the sense of space-time, then he's not really dead and you guys never existed, so you can't be grieving the loss of your husband. Like, He had this weird logic, but because his mind worked differently, he was really good at some things and really bad at other things, like everybody else on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
But like simplicity itself, that's what I don't get, because like the word doesn't mean invaluable or useless or less of a person or anything. If you are simple and somebody thinks you're dumb and you know that you're not, the person calling you simple is dumb. Therefore, why are you offended? Or if you believe them and you say, I am dumb, but it has nothing to do with my character or virtue as a human being, so why would I be offended by it?
So,
or they could take it the Buddhist sense and be like, thank you.
Yeah, but most, like, it is historical quirk, and the way English works in our society, it is an insult. But that doesn't mean, like, if you think about it, but that, like, I was being blithe. Now, the thing is that what you get out of, now, I don't really...
The reason why I'm belaboring it is because it actually covers everything we're talking about here. We're talking about simplicity as a better, higher aspiration, but at the same token, we're taking offense to the term, as if intellectualism is all there is to our core being.
Well, I'm not taking offense to simplicity, but if I call someone simple, that...
Not you. I'm
like,
saying
I
we
should
as a
know
society.
better.
It's colloquially, that's normal for people to think simple means dumb.
Right.
Not just
Now,
you and not just her. But like, why does it matter? That's what I don't get. Why are people trying to prove they're intelligent by making things that are simple sound complex?
Because they're insecure.
About their intelligence.
Yeah.
Because we keep calling people dumb and valuing their humanity as a reflection of their intellect. And
well,
I think that's retarded.
I think, well, we do value people passively for their capability. A person that's more capable is going to generally have more success. But that doesn't mean we can't help those that, you know, can't seem to get their shit together, because sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes you shouldn't have been taking drugs. But
why is intelligence so important? That's what I don't get. Like, why go through all this rigmarole trying to make themselves sound smarter than they actually are? It's because they're worried and insecure or whatever about people's perception of their core being based on their intellect, and that fundamentally is wrong, just based on our laws of morality.
Right. But one of the things is that we're also selling them something that is kind of dumb. Like, we're telling everybody that they have to have a big mansion and a house, and they have to have, you know, a CEO job, and they have to be, you know, success. And one of these weird visions of success. You know, but then we're also telling them that, like, marriage isn't a version of success. Having kids isn't a version of success anymore, because, you know, you're immoral for having kids like you. So, but like, it's pretty much where I'm going to draw that line, just with those two words, my Anglo-Saxon monosyllables. But I think I don't really want to labor that too much, because I want to get into, I want to kind of spring off of something you said a bit previous, is that, and I think it'll explain a lot of this, is that I think it works with a bit of a metaphor. I'm going to keep this simple, because everyone has a bedroom or a living room or a kitchen. Depends on what you want. Pick one. That room, if you decide to store a bunch of stuff in it, you know, it becomes cluttered and stuff. It's good at storing that stuff because it's space and it's your space. You can't keep it outside because it'll get all wet. So, you know, but then it becomes hard to get to your, it gets hard to get to your bed because there's stuff all over the floor. There's boxes there. You can't find the stuff you want. And you can fit a ton of stuff in there. You know, some people have small rooms, some people have large rooms, some people have white rooms, some people have black rooms. So yeah, the metaphor is not that deep, but it's a good one. So, but you can fit a lot of stuff.
The paint.
But some people have a lot of windows. Anyway, I got many windows. But
it's because you're a visionary.
Yeah, I have. Not going to make the three jokes I came up with in my head just right there. So now, one thing you can do the whole Jordan B. Peterson thing and clean your room. Okay, but that's a good way to start. But that's a good way to start on something else. That's getting tasks done. But one of the things, if we're taking this metaphor down, is that by organizing the room, all the stuff in it, you're able to use it better. Okay. But then what happens if you get rid of the stuff that you don't actually need in the room? Duplicate clothes or that garbage, or, do you really need that big of a garbage can? Maybe go through everything and see what you need and don't need. Then you get rid of all that stuff. You get rid of a bit more. And then all of a sudden you have all this room to live, and it looks better. And you have an easier choice of clothes, and you're organizing yourself in a better way. You've made it simpler. A mess is complex. It's needlessly complex. And then all of a sudden you find yourself able to, you tidy it up. And not only is it now simple, but you've been able, through the simplification, to, dress it up, make it look good, make something like this a room you could bring someone to. Wink, wink. But now, within that simplicity, you're still having simple, but you can explain the simplicity in a complex and nuanced manner. But now it's more effective by other people who come in. So say it's an organized mess. You bring another person in there, say, okay, I don't understand what's going on here. But you clean it up and people get it. It may be a different context. There's different color clothes, there's carpet instead of hardwood, they have a different shaped bed, or they have a water bed for some reason. But they still understand it now. They can get their mind around it. They don't have the muscle memory to get to, wake up, grab your clothes in the same way without thinking, but it's there and it's understandable. Now this is just, the metaphor, if you've been playing games while you're watching this, is literally just, this is your mind, and this is your mind on simplicity, and this is your mind on complexity. And I think the metaphor works because what don't you need in your life? Well, you don't need to be neurotic about what everyone's thinking about. Get rid of that. It's hard because what are they thinking? Well, I don't know. Talk to them. You don't
see. I think the problem with those people is they actually believe they do need it. They believe they need everything. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's so much mess and chaos, is because they hold on to everything.
Right. And so it rules that clutter, that complexity rules you more than you rule your mind. And it ends up being your master. And simplicity is taking control of yourself to some extent. I've never actually put it like that or thought about it like that, but I kind of like it.
It sounds like the order of things.
And I'm not saying be rigid and have a timetable. I'm just saying get rid of the things you don't need, and your actions and your complications and your flourishes that are there to make you seem what you're not. So you have all this stuff. Look at how much stuff I have. I got so much stuff. And we all have this stuff, and we're carrying all this stuff around with us in our heads, and you don't need to. Say what you mean. And that's it. Just say what you mean. You can be as blunt. Well, have some tact. There is politeness. Politeness isn't something that you need to get rid of, but it isn't also something you need to use all the time. But say what you mean, and a lot of that stuff in your brain will become useless. Oh, I need to know how to use a metaphor in order to tell the hamburger person that I want my fries like this. It's like, no, salty fries, please. And love that salt. Now it changes for everybody. For me, there was a lot of stuff that I was going through that I was holding this baggage, and I really didn't know what was going on. My complexity was that of confusion. I had no idea where I was going, what I was doing. And I had all this stuff in the hopes that one of these threads was going to be the way I needed to go. And I just started disregarding that. And I started hiding everything. And it was simple on the outside and complex on the inside, because I wasn't showing anybody who I really was. And I stopped doing that, and I found the thread that I needed to pull, and I found the things I needed to do, and I found kind of a power within me that I could use in everyday life to argue or to get what I want. Not in I'm going to get what I want and manipulate people. No, I'm going to go and work for the things that I want. And this it's really hard to talk about simplicity because I'm saying just get rid of the stuff you don't need and do what you need to do.
But I think you need to describe like how you figure out things that you don't need, because people think they need the things that they have that they don't need. That's the problem. The problem with people hanging on to things that are senseless is that they've attributed value and carry it with them because they've attributed value to it. But they're incapable or not yet aware of how to distinguish or differentiate useful, utile items of metaphorical note versus simply stating what needs to be stated simply.
I think one of the ways, and it's going to sound a little backwards, is to go through your actual physical stuff and get rid of some of it. Just
a lot
like,
of it.
A lot of it. Like, what do you actually, what's a trinket? What do you not actually need? And then getting rid of that, you get used to giving up something, you know, noticing the feeling that you have when something is of only dubious potential value. Because like, do I actually need this thing? No, get rid of it. Well, what if I need it one day? Or what if I do this with my life? What if I do that with my life? Well, what are you doing with your life right now? Well, nothing. Well, then how is that going to happen? Get rid of it.
So I think you're sort
and
of...
then, well, sorry, but... sorry. That feeling you can take and you can move that into more mental things. Sorry, yeah, you were going to say?
No, I think you were describing minimalism. I was trying to help you.
I've been thinking about minimalism through this conversation, and I don't know if it's the same thing, because minimalism is a good place to start. Okay, I have rejected everything that's outside. Now what? Well, now you can build from there. But go forth with just you, and you're gonna stop being minimalist real quick.
But as we were just speaking, just like how to get started on simplified thought, minimalism is a good way to start.
Yeah.
What I was sort of getting at.
Forces you
put
into
you
an
in the
empty
frame
room
of
with
mind
yourself.
of actually evaluating things for what they're worth and what to hold on to.
Right. And that's a, yeah. Because not just like artistic minimalism, because like, okay, you got a blank canvas. Okay, now you have perfect freedom to paint whatever you want. Perfect freedom.
Not like Diogenes.
Yeah. And
but where I'm a bit conflicted with all this, though, is because I'm of a type of person where I'm almost exclusively stimulated by complexity. Like, for certain, I don't know how many people are like that. Maybe it's just my OCD, but like...
No, I think that's one of the reasons that this happens is because complexity sometimes is like fascinating, and you can hold it. That's
just it. It's like this beauty in the intricacies and the details of intermingling complex parts. You know what I mean? Like complex integrated systems are really like a watch. All the gears in a watch, as a watch is ticking, you could just watch a watch.
Yeah.
And it's like, amazing.
I'll read something and well, that's a lot of, like, I hear a lot of people talk about math like that. It's like it's kind of a game. I love it. I get it and I do the thing, and then I get a little endorphin boost from solving the equation, and I keep going, and it's just this complexity, and they get used to that, and like, more power to them. But the same thing, you go into nature, and you look into a forest, and you're standing in the middle of a forest, and there's this cacophony of information coming at your head, and your brain's just like, a tree, bird, sky, but you're sitting there and you're just like, this is nice, and you're sitting in a spot of infinite complexity in the forest, and you're just taking it in. Well, we are evolved for that to some extent, but it is nice to hear just an infinite amount of trees just swish back and forth, and just all these bugs, and you know that there's...
The neat thing about that example too is everything around you is so complex, but it's also so simple. So like when I sit in a forest full of trees, I'm amazed by the random dispersal of tree growth. And then I'm amazed by the way that the genetics of the tree with very simple instructions tell it to branch. And then I'm amazed that our language uses the word branch before we even knew how genetics worked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To know that those genetics are like recursive function calls in a program that I write in software. It's just all the more fascinating how simple things are fundamentally in their complexity. Like, to me, that's what's most amazing. But it's really hard to say, be more simple, but also appreciate the complex. But don't over complexify, but don't oversimplify. Like the whole discussion we're having today feels hard to grasp, even though it's so simple and belabored.
Yeah, don't do this. Okay, how? But like, I think you're right, because like one of the things that we do, but the thing is that a lot of people make the complexity part of their personality. Like you make an aspect of yourself. So you saw someone who writes and I have this style, and now, or you have someone who, this is my style. I tell everyone everything all the time. It's like, okay, so your company doesn't get anything done. So that's the thing. Like if you're working, I'm not going to tell, okay, when I send an email or something at work, I'm going to tell them what they need to know and what I think they need to know in the simplest form, because here's what I'm doing, blah. There's no nuance to that. Here's what I'm going to do, blah. I need your opinion on this, blah. And so they go like, okay, so we both have our complexities, but we're engaging with the things that we can engage with so that we can move on with our day and move on with the work. And if they need more information, then we can have that discussion in a meeting, which is what a meeting's supposed to be for.
And then you can prepare for it and you can say it in the simplest possible terms so you don't waste everybody's time.
Right. Complexity is there for, I guess, enjoyment, like you said, or if, it's been come to my acknowledgement that we need to discuss this in a long form manner because you need to understand this in order to move forward. If not, well, then we're just all going to get on with our jobs. I don't need the plumber to explain to me what he's doing when he's fixing my pipes. I might ask him because he's in my house and he's rummaging through my stuff. So I'm going to engage with him in a friendly manner. And I'm going to add some complexity to the situation in order to interact with the guy. And I'll be like, what's that pipe do? And I think part of it is knowing, and this I guess kind of where the wisdom comes in, knowing where complexity is important. Because I don't need to know the chemical structure of the pipe that he's putting under my sink. I like polyvinyl carbonate probably. But
you certainly don't need the plumber saying, like, you have to attach a 90 down to the elbow for the P-trap near the PRV valve. Like, that's not helpful to anyone who's not a plumber. The pressure release valve, saying the whole word instead of the acronym that they don't know. Mm-hmm. That's the type of complexity simplification that I think we're talking about. Where if you know the other person doesn't know the word you're going to use the word, then explain it, or use a different word. Don't use the word because someone won't understand it. Yeah, I think that's sort of, maybe I missed the mark, or...
No, it's to simplify it, don't be a dick.
Yeah, don't be a dick.
So it's very nuanced because it's so circumstantial. But I think we've come up with some good axioms. One of the people that has definitely influenced my thought on this are the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius in particular, who's like, yeah, you see those people over there doing their thing? Yeah, don't worry about that. Focus on what you're doing. It's like, why are you worrying about what other people do when you don't even respect them? So, and this has a lot of
Dale Carnegie taught me that.
And so
Carnegie,
there's a lot of like, this isn't new knowledge, and we're not breaking any bounds. We're trying to work it through our brains so we can better use it. And hopefully this helps everyone else better use it. But it comes down to showing off doesn't get you what you want. Just say what you mean. And if you want to have some flourish after, practice with it. Write some poetry. See what happens. Watch yourself.
And work at it. Like, massage that poetry. Don't just write fluff and be like, okay, done, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, actually put the work into editing a really carefully thought out set of words. Because that, to me, is far more fulfilling than just having a quantity of produced product. And having a quantity of quality produced product is useful. You don't want it to be over quality because then you don't produce enough. But finding balance and moderation, as always,
one of the things to do to practice would be literally to just go to your your parents or something, or have a layman read your papers, like a layman being someone outside of your field. Go talk to what you're studying with your grandparents or your parents or something, unless they're in your field, and try to explain what you learned in class. And they'll probably have some more to say than you'll expect them to, because they are probably interested in this complexity you're throwing down on the table. But if you can explain it to them in a way that a layman understands, well, you've just simplified it to an extent that someone who hasn't done the reading you have can get it, which means, they kind of grasp it, and now you get it. And you don't have to use the flowery language anymore. You can use those words you just came up with. And a lot of scholarship and a lot of the literature in the past 2,500 years, the best stuff that makes it through is stuff that speaks these simple facts in a way that allows us to get it without too much effort. So, you read Aurelius and he just says it in such a way that's matter of fact. Don't worry about it. Think about your death. Now move on with your life. Don't worry about what other people are saying about you. They're probably talking about you like that because they're worried about themselves.
I think on that front, Seneca was probably a better resource than Marcus Aurelius because he wrote to the common people a lot of times, especially with respect to life and death and grievance and all that.
And I just read the Meditations again.
Aurelius is great, but I think it's more academic than Seneca, or at least it's presented more academically than Seneca.
Yeah, but he does do a good show of being like, the first two books are pretty much just like, be grateful. Here's how I'm grateful. You can do the same. But like, the simplicity that we're talking about needs to be cultivated in your own way. And everyone's going to have it differently. My simplicity is not the same simplicity that yours will be, because you are a different person. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. The meta facts will, but like, what it means for me to say what I mean and what it means for another to, or what it means for me to take people at face value. It might be harder for other people, especially if you have a narcissistic git in your family. So you have to actually decipher everything they're saying.
I think everybody just needs to carry around like a pocket Socrates, like the gadfly that just pokes at every thought that comes by. Like, everybody should just do that. And I know I say that because I'm a philosopher, but I think everybody should just pretend Plato or Socrates is sitting in the back pocket saying like, "Hey, that's a weird thought. Why are you thinking that? Why do you like that? Why'd you say it like that?"
Well, it's just like like, be objective about yourself. Have
not forever, but just for a day.
You don't need, and just be like, why are you doing this? Just be critical of your own actions.
Of every thought. Like, why are you offended by that? Why did you say it that way? Why did you stay quiet when you should have spoken out? That's not what you meant. Why did you lie to them? And like every little thing that pops into your head.
Right. And I think people do that. But the thing is, like, if you don't follow through, like, what can you do that would make that better? What can you do that would force you to act more effectively in that situation? There's a lot of people who just get neurotic. A lot of people are already doing this. They know what they're doing wrong. They're just not doing anything about it, or they're just putting the blame onto other people. Like, we all kind of know we all know our failings because we enumerate them in our minds.
I don't think we do it very well. The question is,
like, no, we don't, because we make up stuff too.
Yeah.
But the question is, we also lie to ourselves about why they're happening. We lie to ourselves about, it's because of this external thing or that. It's like,
and we justify our anxieties and we rationalize our fears. Like, we'll completely make it sound normal that we have these insane thoughts.
Yeah.
To ourselves.
And when in reality, it's just, you don't like that person at work. How are you going to deal with that? Or you are not trying hard enough in school, or I don't know, you are you're worried about this or that, and you're projecting onto something else. Like, it's complicated, and you just have to be like, part of it is honesty. You have to be honest with yourself, but then you have to actually follow through with the thing that you know that you need to do to fix it. Sometimes it's hard. Well, it's always hard. Anything worth doing.
One thing I wanted to ask you then about that before we close up, I think we might be about ready to wrap up.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, like, politics, the macrocosms of this oversimplification thing. So when Trump was getting elected, people said, this guy's rich. I've seen him on TV. He must be smart. Let's vote him as president. Like, all of these insane assumptions just peddled one after the other, and the guy got into presidency. And that, to me, is a symptom of oversimplification, because people could have checked how his businesses did, how much money he actually made, how much money he actually had. They could have listened to his speeches and realized he's incompetent. But they oversimplified things, and it caused like irreparable harm to the country in so many different ways, not just from like the obvious trade wars, this and that, but you've given a nincompoop the secrets of the entire nation. Like, that's a huge security risk for the entire country moving forward in perpetuity.
And Canada's not doing much better, but at the same time, I think a lot of it is with regard to politics is doing the same thing that I mentioned that the banks are doing.
Yeah.
Look at the monkey over here. Look at the monkey. Isn't this a very difficult monkey? And that's
what I mean by the sleight of hand. It's like, look over here while they steal your wallet.
But like, I don't want to be too cynical about politics, but at the same time, there's a lot of intentional confusion put forth to like, don't worry about it. Don't do this. Don't do that. Like Canadian politics, you got all these things that our prime minister has been rightfully accused of doing. And all of a sudden, you've got, it's like, oh, that's great. Now let's talk about gender theory. It's like, wait, what? Can we talk about that weird investment that was made in Quebec? And
but we're sitting here advocating for more simplicity, but there's also a really sharp pitfall from oversimplified things. Like, there's actual harm and damage caused by oversimplifying things.
Yeah, so the part of that I wouldn't actually put on the so you have one side, the politicians who are
no, they're marketing themselves.
No, but like the politicians are intentionally confusing things. Here's what's going on. Oh, here's what's this. And then you have the media who's, then you get a soundbite of this super complex thing that doesn't actually mean anything being brought.
More jobs.
Yeah, there's more jobs. And it's just a soundbite. And it's just like, so you actually watch the speech and you're like, okay, I see what he's saying. I don't like it, but he is saying that. So, and then you watch CNN and you're just like, okay, that's a little simple. So I think part of it is watching, like the simplicity I'm not talking about again is not this simplicity. The what's happening in the political sphere is a fostering of ignorance and not simplicity. So they're using simple in the other definition of the word, not the way I'm generally using it here. I guess streamlining would be a better word for what we're using here, but they're keeping it simple because they don't want an actual conversation going. It's a gaffe. What was that? A gaffe is when a politician tells the truth, so or actually makes sense. And
I'm not saying I don't understand why they're doing it. What I'm saying is we should address the fact that simplicity isn't just an overarching better. It's not just good to be simple. More simple, more better is not a solution to anything.
No, and like that's why I'm saying like this is something that you need to cultivate in yourself, not just in but
that's sort of like saying like you want to be a better painter, you should just get better at painting. Like it's not really helpful to tell people they should just be better at being self-objective.
That's true.
So that's what I'm trying to pick out of you. How do you make people realize, like for instance, when that senator went on the floor with the snowball and said environmentalists keep talking about there's climate change, but look, it's snowing outside. Like when grown, educated, mature, six-figure salaried adults can't distinguish the difference between climate and temperature and weather, like that's an oversimplification problem, I think.
I think one of the problems is that man is an idiot and he doesn't need to be an idiot. I think what I'm saying here is that guy's an idiot and you don't have to be an idiot. And he simplified something. I got it. So he's taking a complex issue and trying to simplify it down to a snowball. So global warming, which is a complex issue.
And an ironic metaphor, actually.
Yeah. So
because the problem snowballs.
Yeah. And he's taking just literally the basic, like it's super complex. It's so complex. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to simplify it down to something that has no relation to the actual problem. So global warming is hot, warm equals hot, snowball equals cold. So look, like that's a simplification, but it has no relation to the thing that it's being related to. It's words and deeds are no kin to one another, as Shakespeare would say. But for some reason that came to my mind in Othello. But essentially, he's an idiot, so he doesn't actually know what he's talking about. So he's not, instead of making it too simple, he's simplified something to a point where it has no relation to what he's actually talking about. So there has to be a actual connection between the simplified aspect of it and the complex reality.
So it must be real, in other words.
Yeah, you gotta be real.
Sorry, so I'm just playing the simplicity game.
I think that's a good example, because definitely. But I think if I'm going to present,
people should be able to point this out. He should be able to say whatever he wants, and everybody should be able to look and point at him, and for themselves realize how ridiculous that is.
Well, everyone does realize how difficult.
No, he got elected.
Well, no, okay, he's an idiot, and there's a lot of idiots out there. So the thing is that politics aside, is that it's still a good example, because you're going to have to deal with idiots, and there's going to be a lot of idiots.
Why are the masses not pointing it out? Like that's
the masses.
The thing I want to fix and have this channel for, so that people see this and be like, oh, I follow people like that. I should reconsider my own. Like that's self-awareness for the sake of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Not for the sake of action.
Well, it's like changing your Facebook profile to have the whatever tragedy of the week. But I think a lot of it is...
but not just to raise awareness to tell people how aware you are. I'm saying like we should tell people how to be simple in the right ways, because they're obviously not.
Mm-hmm. So like your simplicity has to, like, the way what I'm presenting is a simplified version of what I am feeling, or what I am thinking, or what I am on the inside, which is kind of a dumb way of putting it. But if my words do not match my actions, which do not match my my intention, well, just the way I am, like I know I am on the inside. So like the objective reality of the confusion and complexity that is Jordan. And if what I present has no kin to that, then I'm going to be a bit of a mess, and people are going to think I'm an idiot. Now, if I'm again speaking on things that I don't know about, I am an idiot. If I'm not trying to simplify something that is a correct representation of the thing I'm trying to represent. Now, the thing is that that's a work in progress, and there's not going to be one thing. It's such a slow thing. This isn't going to be something that, oh, I just simplified my life and now no, this took me years. And the thing is that not everyone's going to approach their maturity. Some people might not even get it. They might die without having matured. But even if we reach a couple people, those people will take time, rightly, to become more mature. Unfortunately, some people get elected before they finish their maturity, and they do idiotic things. And as much as I hate it, I can, as long as we at least start people on maybe a journey towards some sort of maturity, using this as not like the be all and end all, but as one aspect that they can, meditate on, then that's better than nothing. If we can reach one person and in 5 years they're a better person, well, they're still going to do stupid things along the way, but maybe they can correct them, or maybe people can forgive them, as long as they actually do show progress. Now, Trump is not going to show any remorse. So, but at the same time, I don't even have to worry about him. Like, and so I can work to fix, like, there's always going to be stuff. We're still dealing with problems that people have made thousands of years ago, and we're doing okay, but it's a slow process, and we kind of have to just help each other along. And
well,
so
I just want to correct you on one point. I think you said that very astutely.
What? What point is that a correction of?
You started off saying this is a bad way of putting it, but it was actually a very good way of putting it.
Maybe I figured
it's the springboard to betterment, to self-improvement.
I think anything further out of me would be just a exercise in diminishing returns. So, but I think I've said my
cyclical
piece.
redundance.
That's a very astute observation of the current mal-explanation that I'm currently engaged in.
I should have prepared a whole bunch of word salads before the show started.
One of the things is that...
Not that the listeners want to hear it.
Now, here's a thing. Here's a funny thing that happened when I was in school. I learned how to do that really well. Just to pull random, like, really verbose stuff just straight out of my butt. And I learned it, and I don't know why I learned it, and I don't know how or when I learned it. It's just some point I was just able to say things that
That's what
nothing.
They teach you in school.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, I'll just do it, and people, like, I don't know, sometimes I'll do it just for fun, because it is funny. But I want to use my power for good and not evil.
So it irritates me. Like, it really gets under my skin, to be honest. I love jargon when it's really craftily constructed. Do you know what I mean?
Science paper. There's nothing but jargon, but if you figure it out, it's like, oh, this is what he's saying, and and you understand why they have to use it. Yeah, quality lectures, definitely, because they're using all that stuff properly, and that's about as simple as they can make it.
Yeah, but when you hear a bunch of people just discussing things they don't know, I'm not saying they can't talk about things that they don't know, because that's how we learn, is just by talking about stuff until we get to know it.
Staying in your lane is not a good concept.
But the thing I don't like is the when people are trying to put on the impression of assurity, like when they're assuring people that what they know is true when it's absolute garbledy-gook. That bothers me, because it's misleading people who might be susceptible to their influence.
Yeah, and they like present you, here's the plan for the next stage of the project, and you just look at it and be like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, like anti-vaxxers. If they think a vaccine's going to control your mind, then show me a single research paper where you can inject somebody with something and control their mind. Like, I want to know about that.
Do you remember business class where they would say, okay, the first thing to do is have a plan. P is for progress.
God, don't even get me
stuff
started.
Like that. But then you see someone come to they like, okay, it's like a rubric to get you on the path, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that if you apply the rubric literally, then
like having smart goals.
Yeah, it's like
the M is measurable, the A is achievable. Like, no, just common sense. Like, why don't we just teach common sense?
Yeah,
we don't need an acronym to walk us through a thought.
Yeah, we're teaching people based on these absurd rubrics that use like buzzwords that people are paid to make for some reason.
And then they grade you on memorizing the glossary.
It's like, no, the whole point is to learn what you're supposed to be doing well enough, and then getting anyway. That's
outside the box. Okay,
management is another topic. So I'm running out of brain power here. So I think we've said our piece. Thank you very much for the
discussion, though. It was riveting.
Yeah, this is a good one. So I'll let you do the outro, because
next week we're going to be looking into the meaning of life. So stay tuned for that. I put my balls to the wall for it.
Yeah.
We got an RSS feed. It's obviously in the description, comments. You can find it. Subscribe, like, share. That's the best way to show you like and appreciate free content, because we're not asking for your money.
Write YouTube a literal letter and send it to them telling them how much you love us.
Or even better, write it in jargon.
Yeah.
Whatever your field of expertise is, just make it hard for them to read it. Because they won't read it anyway. But
All right.
thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Frivolous Gravitas.